Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm really excited to welcome Dr. John Stoszkowski and Dr. Danny Massaro to the show. Gents, great to have you on.
Hi. How you doing, Dan?
Really good to be speaking with you today. We're going to be talking about critical thinking, and we're going to be doing a bit of a deep dive. So I'm really excited to be speaking to you both about critical thinking and everything associated with that. Let's start where we always start, by getting you both to introduce yourselves to the Sports Psych Show audience. John, why don't we start with you?
Well, I'm actually in a position where I'm struggling to define myself at the minute. You caught me at the right.
We can talk about that, John. I'm a psychologist, so.
I was a senior lecturer at University of Central Lancashire in the UK for the last nearly 12 years, teaching and researching around sports coaching, essentially. So teaching on undergrad and master's level provision, and then researching primarily around coach learning. So a real kind of focus on how coaches learn, especially informally and through more social means rather than formal coach education. And a big focus around that really was how we can make that more critical in nature. So those informal social learning experiences that coaches tend to prefer and say they prefer, how can we make that more critical? So that's been me for the past 11 or 12 years. Before that, I did work in golf at the Professional Golf Association in a coach development role. And then also it was the English Golf Union before that, working in more of a golf development role. So that's kind of recent career. Before that, you probably don't want to know.
What actually got you, just briefly, what got you into golf? Did you play to a good level? Were you just passionate about the game?
Golf was just playing as a kid with my dad, and just kind of never got to any like really excellent level, but really enjoyed it, and kind of got the bug probably in my like later teenage years. And then when I was at my first year at university, I actually went to Switzerland and worked on an international summer camp coaching golf for a few months there. And then that's really when it kicked on from there. But I actually had 10 years out recently, so I've just got back into it this summer. As Danny will tell you, so I've got the bug again this year. So the clubs are back, and I'm back in the game.
You've dusted off the cobwebs. That's a bit of a hiatus, 10 years. I'm at about 5 years or 6 years at the moment. I haven't played for 5 or 6 years. So
you've been playing by himself, though. Getting up at 5 o'clock, playing on his own.
Has he?
That's not,
have you?
That's in it. We can all do that.
He's living that, I'm telling you. 5 a.m, no one around, sun shining, birds singing. Doesn't get better.
Except we're recording this on a January evening, and I'm not too sure. At 5 a.m, at least you can't see where the ball goes, which in my case would probably be quite a good thing. Danny, Dr. Danny Massaro, you have got your doctorate now?
Yeah, just a month ago, just before Christmas.
Congratulations.
I became a dad for the first time, and a few weeks after that, it was a stressful time. Wow. So I'm pretty knackered, but all good, actually, feeling good.
Well, double congratulations to you, mate. And you got that PhD out the way before becoming a dad. So great timing as well. Like it.
Well, yeah, it was planned, I thought
yeah. So, Dr. Danny Massaro, therefore, introduce yourself, sir.
Well, yeah, I've been in education myself, like John, since probably 1997, starting off with teaching GCSE PE after university, HNDs, HNCs, A-levels, BTECs, the college stuff. Somehow worming my way up to some management position there. But what I did when I got married in 2007, I left that job and went on the world squash tour with my wife, who was about 15 in the world at the time. And I began to coach her, help a few different players. My psychology had started with other things, branching out from the academia. So I decided to take a bit of a leap of faith. I was thinking, why am I keep coming to this building here where I live in Preston in England when she's flying around the world? And, it didn't really make any sense.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we set off, and that culminated in she retired in 2019 at the start, and we had an amazing journey really all that time, and she got to the world #1 and world champion and all these other things, and an unbelievable time in there. And all the time I picked a job up in 2007 teaching part-time where John worked at University of Central Lancashire, working really mainly with the master's program on the philosophy to practice module that we have there, sort of a few other bits as well. And yeah, my PhD ended up being like the difference really between the academic sort of side of things that I was teaching and using, and all the latest theories and reading, and the rise of popular science, and all these, and extra support, and sports coaching became a really developed thing, and performance as well. And then I was actually living the life as well, like the immersion of the lived chaotic life. And I did a PhD on trying to firstly say how they were different, but then realized I wanted to try and bridge that gap, and say that, academics the academic thing's not wrong, the lived experience is all right, it's all about context and application. But I just really wanted to shine a light more on that, because I felt like it had been often dismissed when people were generalizing around certain things. So it just ended up doing that, and it took me to philosophy and things like that. So, and all along I was working and picking up with different clients, you see, in the world of squash, and helping different people on the mental side, and that has become, my business as well.
Interesting, fascinating background. Well, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking critical thinking, and I want to start with a quote, and I've lifted this from one of your blog posts, John, from a quote from Nietzsche, who said, "If you wish to strive for peace of mind and happiness, then believe. If you wish to be a disciple of truth, then inquire." I'll let that one simmer. I suppose turning to you firstly, John. I mean, we're here today because we connected. You're creating a course, probably could be described around critical thinking, which we'll talk more about towards the end of this show. But I know critical thinking is close to your heart. As an academic, as a practitioner. So talk to us a little bit about critical thinking. What is critical thinking to you within the coaching domain?
Yeah, I mean, no one's going to get insights like Nietzsche in the next hour, put it that way, but we'll give it a go. It's probably easy to say what it isn't initially, because I'm glad you said for me, because I'm not going to stand here and pretend I'm some kind of world expert on critical thinking and try and hammer it from that point of view. But so that's kind of a good segment. It's probably what it isn't. So there'll clearly be some really like hardcore definition where, you're talking basic principles around logic and calculus and that old school, what pure critical thinking was back in the day. I'm not coming at it from that point of view. So we're not talking maths and grammar and how we kind of debunk fallacies in reasoning and that at that level. So for me, it's much more about, it's more like a habit of mind, essentially. So it's kind of trying to get into that philosophy of doing, really. So why we do what we do, why we think what we think, what's influenced that over the years as we've kind of come up through the world as a human being in this, like Danny mentioned earlier, this really chaotic, complex world that we live in. It's trying to just zero in on that a little bit and try and make ourselves much more self-aware of the influences on us, how they've affected us, how they impact us day to day, not just as coaches or practitioners, but just as people in our relationships, whether that's family, friends, relationships with your wife, for example. Really getting into that level has just been a little bit more critical about how we go about things in life. So it's definitely, it's a word that I think probably has become a bit of a buzzword in the last few years. I've probably played my role in kind of to blame for that as well, to be honest, in some ways. But I definitely think it's, for example, if we said, right, us three now, we're sitting here having this chat on this January evening, let's have a look at nuclear fission and start thinking critically about what we should do to generate power more efficiently. I'm pretty sure none of us, unless Danny's got some kind of secret knowledge of nuclear fission in the background, we wouldn't have the first clue where to start, because we just don't have the underpinning knowledge to give us that kind of base to work from to start thinking critically about it. So there's definitely there's a domain specificity to it, I think would be a useful term, that to think critically about something, you've got to have a little bit of knowledge about it to give you that way in to start thinking critically about it. But the one beauty that we do have as people is no one knows us as ourselves better than us. So we all know our background and the experiences we've had and the people we've interacted with. No one knows that better than us. So we do have that knowledge. And where I'm coming at it from a point of view at the minute is, all right, we've got that knowledge, so we can start to think critically about this stuff. What are some of the influences on us that have impacted that, and just try to shine a light on some stuff that people have maybe never considered before, and they're maybe just unaware of how they could be being affected at different points in their life by a lot of these social influences. So that's where I'm really trying to come at it from. It's that kind of attitude of self-critique, not in a negative way, and being critical of yourself and trying to critique everything you do is bad, and I'm rubbish at this and I'm crap at that and I need to do this. It's self-critique more and just about how you can be a better person, more authentic in what you're doing. Because what you're doing has some underpinning justification for it. You're not just being swept along by the crowd, or, just going along with what your friends are doing at that time or what's popular at that moment in time. You're just a lot more reasoning in your justification for why you're doing what you're doing. So it's that kind of self-critique. It's auditing your thinking a little bit as well. So it's just trying to say, actually, yeah, why do I think that? Maybe I've been doing this for a few years this way, but actually, why did I start doing that? Or why have I taken this approach when I'm using that? Or, why does this person appeal to me particularly? And whether it's a theory or someone on social media or a coach that you work with, someone that coaches you, it's just been a little bit more cognizant of the reason that you've got for that stuff. So yeah, it's auditing your thinking, and it's just trying to be unbiased as you do it as well. For me, that's a key part of it. So really trying to take yourself out of it and go, right, what am I doing? How am I doing it? But why am I doing it that way?
I just think there's some fascinating themes there, John. I've written a few things down. I mean, beginning, reinforcing what Danny said, we live in a complex and chaotic world, and posing the question, how can we have any kind of certainty? And certainly coaching could be construed as a complex and a chaotic world. And I've obviously written down this word why. Speaking with Dr. Oliver Runswick on the Sports Light Show a few months ago, and he sort of said, as a practitioner, he would go in and ask, just as a skill act coach, just why are you doing what you're doing, which seems to get to the heart of critical thinking, doesn't it? I love that idea of auditing your thinking and striving to be unbiased as you do it. And I also heard critically, and I think we'll probably come on to this a bit later, but the importance of domain knowledge. It's tough to critically think in a certain area without having some kind of domain knowledge. Coming over to you, Danny, I mean, you've already mentioned the complexity and the chaos of coaching, let's say in global squash on the world scene. When you looked around you then, amidst all the players, all the coaches, you probably came across coaches who felt they had a lot of certainty. How can we have that certainty when things are so complex or chaotic? Is that possible? Or are we better served living in a world of uncertainty and constantly questioning what we're doing when we're coaching out there?
Yeah, it's a great question, that. And because when I set off my study as well, it was about saying I don't know is not fashionable. And it ain't going to pay the bills, is it?
Yeah.
So one of my sort of mentors, people I'd seen coach for a long, long time, perhaps before, I hadn't read much coaching theory and so on, but, they feature in the study, and they've been very, very successful with different kinds of people over the years, made some people worse, made some people better, but mainly, and then I'd really taken good players to the very top, in both genders. And what I learned from those people there were times where they were very certain, like bump, exactly when the player needed them to be certain. And there were times where they would go, I don't know, and they'd really go down more of the absurdity stuff. This can just happen. Who knows? I'm saying this, but do I really know that it's true? I'm probably just making excuses. Yeah. The player probably is. We don't know really what happened. We'll have a look at it in a week. And whereas I was, because of my academia, and I was always more like, no, sort it now, pragmatic, nip it in the bud, analyze it, get some stats, fix it. We can always improve it. And he used to look at me, and a couple of these people, they look at me like, what are you on about? You've gone a bit, So there were good things I were doing, and there were good things they were doing. But yeah, I think the best people that I've seen work, and the best ones that didn't get stuck in the ones that could stick to it, but they didn't get stuck. They didn't get stuck thinking with guilt or shame that they did something wrong, as if there was a fix and they didn't do it right. And that's the same when I work with players a lot as well. There's so much of this rationality and cause and effect, and this A equals B equals C. And like John, they're not thinking critically enough. They're thinking, what did I do wrong? How can I make it better straight away, as if there is a definite answer. And they almost become like sick professionals, where they believe that everything's down to them. And I've been helping people, I think the biggest area I've helped them with is to sometimes say, we don't really know what happened, and we don't really know how to go forward, but let's do what we normally do and give it a shot. And I think it's been taking the pressure off people. In other words, that in a way for me, that's saying, I'm here with you. We are going to move on. We're going to try things. We're going to think about it. But overall, we don't really know it's too complex. It's chaotic. It's a pre-separated unfolding of becoming sport. It's just random. It unfolds. It's there. It just pops up and it happens. And if we don't if we don't allow that enough, we become too serious, and also the wonder of sport goes away and the magic of it, and we leave no room for for sort of empathy for the self and almost that childlike wonderment really of what sport is. We've just turned it too seriously into a non-complex sort of rational process, if that makes sense. That's my view anyway.
I think Danny's right though, that element of simplicity sells, doesn't it? So I think just as human beings we have that natural hatred of ambiguity, and we kind of almost need to feel like, I don't know, the world is orderly and A does equal B and that equals C, and then if I do this I'll get that. I think we have an inherent need for that. So a lot of people, when you start saying, oh well, let's try and be more critical and think more critically, it is quite a scary thing. It's an uncomfortable, depending on the person and what it is, it can be quite unpleasant, because it maybe does shine a light on, actually, yeah, there's so much randomness and complexity, and there aren't actually any unambiguous answers here that are just, this is what we're going to do or what you need to do in this scenario. We probably do, it's like touching a hot stove, isn't it? You kind of go, oof, yeah, I'm not going near that again. And you just think, I'll leave that alone and I'll crack on doing what I'm doing. And it's undeniable, I think, that people do then kind of prey on the back of that a little bit. Obviously, when, I'm sure we'll talk about social media and stuff like that. If you're selling a simple message and you've got the answer for someone, and they're maybe in that in-between world where they're thinking, I'm not sure, I need a bit of guidance, they're the people that then really appeal, the gurus and the people with the answers and the solution for you. It's comforting, isn't it? And you're like, I just want someone to put their arm around me and go, yeah, this is what you need. Just do that. Don't listen to them. Away you go, do this. I've got the answer. I'll keep you right. I think as humans, that's comforting, and we seek that comfort, really. It's not natural to move towards ambiguity, I don't think.
It feels very uncoach-like, doesn't it? I mean, as you were both speaking there, I was thinking about Professor Stephen Rolnick, motivational interviewing, and how he talks about the writing reflex that seems to be, I suppose, part of us as human beings, but certainly coaching. Would you agree with me, perhaps, that coaching has been socialized? As soon as we put on our coaching hat, we feel like we've got to engage in the writing reflex. We've got to give people the answers, tell them what to do, rather than take a step back and consider it and maybe negotiate the answer, or ask the right kind of questions. It could potentially feel quite weak doing that, whereas maybe that could be considered a strength. No question, guys. It's just some thoughts following on from what you were saying.
I think for me, it was always working with especially master's students in the last few years when they're maybe on the younger side. So they've been coaching for a bit, but they're still, maybe mid-20s, late 20s. They're not, long in the tooth. They're still trying to make their way in the industry, and they're on the career path. They're trying to get jobs. It's competitive. It's a bit dog-eat-dog. So there is that massive pressure on them to perform. And that kind of impression management stuff then comes in where, the classic scenario is the parents are watching and they're stood there, and maybe, the players are doing what they're doing, and they feel like it doesn't really matter what the players are learning or how they're progressing. They feel like they've got to do something because they're there as a coach, they're getting paid, the parents are watching, maybe a more senior coach from the higher age group is watching, and they're thinking, I've got to show them what I can do. I've got to be a coach. I've got to get in there and coach and give it my kind of best 5-minute pitch. And it's almost like they're then ignoring what the players need or the athletes need at that point, because they're just impression managing to go, I need that job or I need that promotion maybe. Or not even that. A lot of the time it's just, I don't want to look like an idiot. And the parents are thinking, he doesn't know what he's doing. What's the point of this? What are we paying for? So I think that social pressure is huge for coaches in that sense. And to bring critical thinking into that, I think it's always interesting for me how conscious they are of that, because I've definitely spoken to coaches and worked with coaches who will freely admit that, but they do it anyway, because their personal why is bigger than, at that point, it's a negative thing to say, but the development of the people that are coaching at that point. But it's a conscious decision to go, I know that this is maybe not optimal, but I know it's what's going to be optimal for me to look good in this particular scenario. So they do it anyway. So it's almost like a reverse critical thinking where they've still been quite reasoned and analytical. They've got that declarative understanding of this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's just that it's because it's going to get me perhaps a better job or to look better in that situation.
I take that point on further. So my answer is great. So that I have been that person for, and probably still am in many scenarios. And as time has gone on, I've been, for whatever reason, maybe post-success, got older, don't need to prove myself anymore, whatever, confidence has changed, or read more, I don't know. I do feel that I've become more like a comedian who just knows they're going to go on stage and they're all going to laugh anyway because I'm now Billy Connolly or Stuart Lee. Like, I have a style that you've just come to laugh anyway. You've given me that permission to be me, and all you really want is me being me. So if me being me happens to include the style of, one-liners, then you want the one-liners. You want me. So if tell me, your player might say, look, stop trying to be all critical thinking. Tell me what's wrong with my backhand. Just tell me. And you go, right, for 5 minutes, you hammer them and you just give them full on didactic, this is wrong, this is bad, lift your rack, do this. And they've asked for it. I think we get to a point where players know your style, your general style of you at your optimal, but what you do better is you wait to be asked. And I've found that for long-term trust and long-term relationships, when you can just hold a space and give people their dignity and their time on their own to come to you when they really want you to really be you, like in other words, they buy a ticket for the gig or something like that. You just go on there and you just be you, and you don't have to overthink it. You don't. But at times where you personally might be feeling a little needy or a bit out of work, or you haven't had a lot of likes, or you're a bit bored and you want spruce, you want some serotonin or whatever, you want some sprucing up and you want some high, you might go fishing for it and become forceful. I'm the rescuer, I can help, I need a little bit of significance again, and you got overcoach or overstep the mark. And I can recognise that in myself. I do all of that, what I've just said, at various times. But overall, I think the sophisticated coaches, the ones that have had more experience or can kind of know the style and basically don't really apologise for it, but relax around the style. But when they're asked, they sort of hit them full on with their brand, really. Their brand, their way they coach.
There was a really good lad, Danny, and I worked with a couple of years ago on the Masters programme. He was kind of like a bit like one of the lads initially, but you could tell the brain cog started ticking as he just got a bit more mature, and he started, a lot of the stuff Danny and I talk about started resonating with it. And he ended up doing his dissertation. He was a good coach. He was coaching at a championship level football club in the academy, making his way up, and that was his dream, wanting to be like a professional football coach. But Danny and I started switching him on to, it was probably from Danny's session, he got wind of Sartre and Sartre's concept of bad faith. You could tell it was almost like over those weeks, he starts kind of and he's thinking, oh God, and it's resonating with him. He's thinking, oh God, and he's putting himself in that position. And ended up doing his dissertation on how he's working in the academy, and he puts the tracksuit on, and he's really just acting the role of that coach. He wasn't the coach, because everything was just being guided by, what he had to do to get on in that context, and impressing certain people like we talked about earlier. And he really started, it was almost like the classic, in the Matrix, like the blue pill or the red pill. It was like he'd taken the red pill and he immediately regretted it, because it was like, I can't unknow this now. It was like, I just feel really inauthentic, and I really feel like I'm kind of living that bad faith lifestyle almost, where he's just going through and acting out the role of the coach without really believing in what he was doing. So he's really like thinking critically about what he's doing, but it almost sent him too far the other way, where it's like, well, what do I do now? Do I just sell my soul and I keep going with it, or do I, kind of turn back and kind of forget that I ever did this? But he did a really good dissertation on it, like a brilliant piece of work. I just don't know how well it maybe serve him in the future as a coach now.
That was something with Laura's psychology, my wife, was a real breakthrough in her career, was when she realised that she was being a professional in bad faith. She'd read all the winning mindset and all the Clive Woodward's things and old Dave Brailsford's things. It was all coming in 2009, 2000. This is 15 ways to win and Yehuda's model on winning. And they were helpful because they sort of got you going, She became almost like someone who goes to church and says the prayers and expects just to go to heaven. It was like, if I just do all the training, then the results will just happen, surely. And she couldn't get her head around it when girls who weren't doing the sort of stuff you're supposed to look like as a professional, it weren't, the wins weren't coming, particularly players from Egypt who have taken over squash, really, who've done none of this. They're very refreshing when I work with the Egyptians, because the women, the men, all of them, they're so amazing, but very, very what we might call naive in terms of sports coaching, sports science, and so on. They just sort of get to it, and same with the parenting and different culture. And it did her head in, because she felt that she was in this advanced place of, British and Americanized type, Western, advanced psychology, and it was only when she realized that she was being a bit like that, a little bit too acting the role of a professional, not relaxing, and as it was like, you're a squash player, you're not a squash athlete. You play squash. You're not a machine. And it's in the moment, and it's all these things can come in. She started to really relax. She could still do the work, still benefit from all the psychology, all the weights, all the science. She really benefited, but there was also became this realization that she had to relax, that nothing was therefore guaranteed just because she was playing the role of the professional, the perfect pros type thing. And I've worked with a lot of athletes, that get stuck into that. You see it in the media as well, and you see them, they're trying their best, but really getting nowhere. Then the fans are on the case, and they get a bit depressed, and they're a bit down, and I don't feel like they've left any slack in the system.
So, listen to what you're saying there, Danny, and I'm conscious I want to keep the critical thinking as close to coaching as possible, but it sounds like Laura went through a period of critical thinking. I mean, was it, if I may ask, was it you that started that period of critical thinking, or was it an epiphany or something like that? I'm reading all these books and nothing's changing. So it sounds like she went through a period of critical thinking, and then something, struck and she got it.
I think to probably want to hang around with me when we first ever met, she must have had something about her that like, for the way I talked, because what we're like, us kind of people, we're a bit out there, aren't we, with our thinking, so there must have been some intrigue, some attraction to that, and I think that I actually think on that one it was her coach, David Pearson, who was this more of a throwback late 70s 80s guy, who just was like, you are getting up your own backside with this, like, just because you've ate that type of almond and not that type of almond doesn't mean you're going to win or lose a bloody squash match. It were little jokey things, and why not have a glass of wine, and why not, and just little ways of being that brought her to that. But equally, some good psychology as well. She used Enneagram, for example, with her psychologist, which is not necessarily factually scientifically true, but it was a personality thing that got her to recognize traits in herself that then she could work with. For her it worked, and she started to understand that just because she had her rules for her, it didn't mean her rules had to apply for everyone else, and blah blah blah. So yeah, it was working at it, to be honest, Dan. It was working hard at that, and it started to arise.
I think this is a fascinating conversation, because I'm going to try to draw together, in a way you both probably don't want me to do this, because I'm going to put this into some neat boxes here, which probably is the antithesis of what we're saying about complexity and chaos. But what I'm hearing from you, and again, I appreciate the landscape is more complex, but coaches can be subject to impression management. And they possibly need to critically think through how they're behaving, ask themselves why they're behaving in the manner they are, because they might be engaging in some form of impression management. The young man that you spoke about, who was part of your cohort of students. And equally, what I'm hearing as well, and you alluded to it earlier in the podcast, John, and you've really emphasized it there, Danny, with regard to Laura, is current trends as well. Coaches can be subject to current trends. And you might point to some trends. I know you do, John, in your blog, and Danny, listening to some interviews from you before, you've talked about this in terms, or you've talked about it already today, about marginal gains and 1% and 10,000 hours, and you spoke about mindset and resilience and stuff. And I want to be mindful here that we've had some great academics and great practitioners on who talked about these topics and research them and do an incredible job. And they're all, as you're saying there, Danny, everything's relevant and everything's pertinent. But what I'm hearing from you both, I'm going to come to this word authenticity, is what Laura did there, and what you're talking about is coaches being authentic, being mindful of what they're doing, critically appraising what they're doing, asking the why, and striving to come back to their authentic coaching selves. Again, guys, no question, but just some thoughts to throw back at you.
Yeah, I think that all those sort of things, even the resilience stuff that was maybe 2 years ago was popular, and now we're going on to the well-being. A lot of things are linked with well-being, aren't they? And the derivative of everyone being mentally well and so on. We have gone through all these things, and you are a product. You are immersed and enmeshed into your time, and lots of these things, they've temporarily helped. I think they temporarily help, but when they're presented as the be-all and end-all through all time, at all stages, that's the way like any fundamentalist type thinking, you get stuck. I think what's always helpful for me, I used to read a lot of stuff by Ken Wilber, who was an American philosopher, more of an educationalist. He talked a lot, he was more of the integral approach to things, but one saying he always had was that things are true and partially true. And nobody's so clever that they can be completely 100% wrong. There's always something there. And I think that, like we were saying earlier, these things, Carol Dweck's original book wasn't necessarily to end up being this big mindset thing that would end up on every primary school wall in sports. She did it as a, understanding into motivation. I think when it's taken up and then turned into something like a product that, you just basically run with and copy, and think that's it forever. And you get that when you're recommending books and people say, give me a book. And you might say, well, that book, worked for them. They read Eckhart Tolle, they read a fable, they read a brain science, they read, Relentless by Tim Grover, or some, more traditional go for it book. I found that at different stages and different times, little bits kept working in different ways. He was sort of always, and I think it's sometimes knowing that as well. It's not necessarily thinking I've found the exact answer all the time, but equally, I don't think you should just dismiss things out of sight just because, you're more highbrow than that theory. Or NLP, load of crap, or the Enneagram, awful, mindset, terrible, just a thing. I think you've got to do it the other way. I think you've got to give people a bit of, time when they come up with some decent ideas, and then it's up to the individual to use it how they will. But I don't think anything encompasses everything.
Two things sprang to mind for me just when you mentioned there, you were kind of drawing them together, Dan.
Yes.
You're obviously keen to focus on coaches and coaching and athletes to some extent, but this is just people. This is irrelevant whether you're a coach or an athlete or a milkman or a vet or anything. As human beings, we're all as susceptible to these influences and errors in thinking as we're going through life. I mean, that was the other thing. I'm not for a minute sitting here coming on your podcast trying to portray myself or be seen as some kind of guru or expert on critical thinking who's just like, immune to any of these impacts and I've got it cracked and everyone's an idiot but me and I know all this stuff. I'm as susceptible as everyone else as a human being to these things. So it's not about teaching people and trying to go, look, stop being an idiot, do this. I'm kind of in the mix with them. So the people that we work with and teach and live alongside, I'm in the mix with them. We're all just trying to make sense of what's going on. But yeah, it's just kind of making that that balance key as well, because I think the danger is, so when Danny was talking about Laura maybe thinking about some stuff, and I mentioned a couple of students, you can go the other way, so you can definitely overthink, and that can probably be as dangerous, because if we're going through life just not making any decisions, not willing to leave the house without spending half an hour to think critically about, get online and get some competing theories and weigh up some different evidence before you decide what to wear that day, you're just going to paralyze yourself, and you can almost get obsessed with that search for truth and getting as much knowledge as possible and seeking answers, getting a bit closer to the correct answer. So that's probably as negative, and it's the thing that springs to mind with me the past probably year or two. I should have done a Google search, actually, when you can track the Google trends on. So I bet your critical thinking's up there, or it's definitely seen an uptick. Because the whole COVID pandemic and everything, there's never been as many people who think they're critical thinkers. And whenever you get a really polarised argument, where it's like you're in that camp, you're in that camp, everyone suddenly becomes an expert. And I think a lot of people are kicking around thinking, yeah, I'm a real critical thinker, I'm reading studies, and everyone's an epidemiologist all of a sudden. And again, I'm as guilty as anyone else. Some of the chats Danny and I have, back in the early days especially, we were reading all sorts of stuff and sharing all sorts of stuff, kind of bumbling through it ourselves, trying to make sense of what's going on here. And I think that's dangerous as well. So people really start overthinking stuff. So it gets really tribal. And when we were speaking before we came on air, Dan, weren't we, about how you pigeonhole yourself, and you maybe get to that point, it's like, I'm too deep now. I've been banging this drum for maybe 5, 10, 15 years now. I'm in so deep, I cannot possibly change my mind. My business is built on it. My following is built on it. Everything I've done and kind of said, that's me now. That's my identity. I can't possibly change my mind. And it's a little bit that, like, even within families, isn't it? Where you've got people having like serious fallouts within families because they hold different views on. Well, using the pandemic as the example, people are proper, like, they're not just having an argument over a drink in the pub. It's like, I'm not speaking to you again. That's it. I'm deleting you from my life because we've had a difference of opinion. And I don't know if I'm kind of getting off script or off topic where I want to go, but I think that's maybe bringing it back to that start point of what is critical thinking. It is little things about just knowing how to argue well, how to have a reasoned debate without throwing your toys out the pram after 2 minutes because someone's disagreed with what you've said. There's a lot of kind of softer skills around that, isn't there? And I don't mean argument as in the negative, pejorative of having a row. I mean having an argument in the positive sense of, look, we're just trying to make sense of what's going on. You've got an opinion, I've got an opinion. Let's just bat it back and forward and see where we get to. We don't have to agree. We don't have to decide here and now, but let's at least pick at the edges and see if we can trip each other up a little bit. And there's a skill and an attitude to that. There's an attitude to want to get involved in those discussions and not just, go along with. A lot of people, like in my own family, for example, will say it's just anything for a quiet life. So just go along with whatever. Just the thought of having an argument to them is so it puts their back up straight away, so they just don't want to engage in it. Whereas a lot of what Danny and I are trying to say, through the way we teach and everything, it's about arguing, but it's that open-minded argument. It's constructive and it's positive, and it's kind of jointly trying to find common ground, I suppose, rather than just tribal. You're on that team, I'm on this team, therefore we hate each other. Everything you say is wrong and everything I say is right. So yeah, Danny, I don't know if you want to add to that, or if I've maybe gone too far askew.
No, we've just always been, we teach, and you're trying to throw spanners in the works to get them to think differently about something. You're provocative sometimes, and deliberately.
But it's done with humour as well, isn't it? So it's done with humour. So I'm sure it's a bit Marmitey. That certainly I know for a fact my style of teaching can be Marmite. So I try and do it with humour. So for example, teaching say research methods module. Most staff in universities absolutely hate teaching that module because it's just so dry to them and it's really technical and it's hard work. Students don't like it, etc. That's probably my favourite module to teach because we're getting into things like ontology and epistemology, but it's not that really, I don't know, cold kind of hardcore research methods stuff. It's like, how are we seeing the world? How have you arrived at that belief? How have your senses been involved in how you've perceived this? So, and you can proper make it interesting and engaging and humorous. And then you get people with you and they go, actually, yeah, it's actually fun and enjoyable this to have some of these mad debates where you're questioning the meaning of life and stuff. That's more critical thinking to me.
Can I therefore pose a question? And before I do, I suppose it's my time to promote the Sports Coach Show in as much as saying this is listened to by people in over 100 countries, and therefore I'm mindful of not everybody knowing what a Marmite teacher is. And so just to say to everybody is you love it or you hate it. So we love or we hate John's teaching, which I'm sure is not true, and I'm sure is a parody of that. But we know what you're...
99 of those 100 countries are still trying to work out who Stuart Lee is. Who's that?
YouTube Stuart Lee. He's very funny. So I would actually like to ask how you both arrived at the centre point of critical thinking when we sort of pose that question of how did you arrive here at this way, this approach and this way of doing things. But before we get there, I did want to, I suppose, pose the question. Can you see or do you think that there can be a benefit to engaging in one approach, essentially? And that's, I suppose, to simplify the coaching process here. But, can you see how somebody might say, I love mindset. I base my coaching around the mindset practices underpinned by the theories of Carol Dweck, or I love deliberate practice. I'm a golf coach and I make sure all of my players are involved in deliberate practice. It's got to be this way. There's a feeling around a metabolic inexpense that it feels easier. It feels lighter. It feels more attainable. It feels almost like I can be a better coach if I commit myself going down this one branch. I am going to be a great coach of this way, and that's going to help me get the most for my clients. Can you kind of see how coaches can get fixed on that and how that can feel right to their lens of the world?
Yeah, you see, again, it's knowing the players, isn't it? And it's knowing the players you're working with if you're a coach or a psychologist. So sometimes you do take a sledgehammer just to crack a peanut, and there's no need. And sometimes players in certain conditions, they just want you to go like, it's that simple, because they need it that simple. You stand there, you do that. You stand there, you do that. And, that's... I really like the sight right stuff that they've been using in snooker and darts, in terms of skill acquisition. You look at the line, you get it on, you get down, you hit the line, done. And it's the act of the, obviously embedded around talent and skill. So finding simplicity amongst all the obvious absurdities and complexities and luck and all this stuff of life, that's like dream, isn't it? That's dream time. If you can just make something so simple, it's metabolically just boom. And I think that's one of the tricks to some, when you do get to those states, when you can knock the ball around in football with the right weight of pass, it exponentially starts getting easier. And the opponents suffer. So therefore, it looks from the outside, doesn't it? We all say, how simple does Roger Federer make it look? or how simple does Phil Taylor make it look at darts, or Ronnie O'Sullivan? But there's obviously, to them it feels, whatever. But I think that's a good point what you make. I do think that it's tempting, and at times, why not? At times, why not nail your hat to this little process and totally believe in it? And if the player goes with you for that year or for that season or that month and it helps them, then why not? Why not do that? I think if you then go to all your players and think, I have now got the medicine for everybody in this particular dose of medicine, and you start becoming like you're some, just come to me. I've got it. So I've had it recently in squash. There's a guy who's doing really well with a certain player, and all of a sudden I can tell he thinks he basically thinks if he coached the top 20, they'd all get better because of his methods.
Right.
And my argument is there'd still have to be a number one, still have to be a number two, still a number three.
Which is quite factual, really, isn't
it? So fine. Saying that, there's something very powerful in his absolute belief that he is right with what he's saying, and it's definitely working with two players. But we don't get to hear about the players that he messes up, frightens. They think they're messing it up because they're not doing it so well, because this system should be working. It's like the old, ask the universe stuff, isn't it? People got into that law of attraction stuff.
Yeah.
That was another one. Why? It can feel like it works. It helps if it gets you through a tournament and you just get on, or believing in Allah, or God, all these things. If they work, they work. But once you start propagating it to everybody, then you're on. I think that's limiting myself.
John,
that word metabolic is actually that's a really key word for me, Dan. I've not written anything publicly or put it out yet, but I've actually just had a paper accepted that it should be out in the next few days. It's like imminent. Literally making that case for how big a factor that is in coach learning, that kind of metabolic status of the coach, and how that will then influence how likely they are to be able to think critically and have an open mind and see and be willing to kind of look at different perspectives and that sort of thing. So for me, it's massive, because if you're, and when I'm saying metabolic, I really mean on that fundamental energy level of the body. I don't mean calories.
Biological.
Like that bioenergetic, your mitochondrial energy production. How are you efficiently doing that and producing enough energy for you to have enough, I don't think capacity is the right word, but enough kind of surplus for you to start thinking critically about stuff? Because if you're energy deficient, and again, I don't mean calories, I don't mean have you eaten enough calories. You could eat, 5,000 calories of gasoline, but it's not going to give you any energy to kind of power your system. But if you are lacking in energy, you're going to be likely to kind of withdraw. You're going to be someone who's thinking, well, I don't have the energy to spare. I've just got to kind of go within myself. I've got to step back. It's that almost like hibernation mindset of any extra expenditure is just digging me even deeper into the hole. So I'm going to kind of resort to that safe opinion where everything's black and white and I can just go, yeah, that's the answer, and I'll just go with that. I'm not going to waste time thinking about alternatives or getting into a row with someone about, what else could be there. It's that kind of hibernation mindset of leave me alone, I'm safe, I just want to conserve energy, I don't want to get into any kind of deep thinking. And that's another big part of that for me, is that's when your gurus and those people who are selling the answer become even more appealing, because it's almost like the Holy Grail, isn't it? Well, I can just put all my attention on that person and go with that, and then I can forget all the other stuff. And then again, that feels safe, it feels warm, so they're putting their arm around you. And then, you could go to the extreme. I think that's where, cults and stuff emerge when that sort of scenario happens. You've got a lot of hypo-metabolic people they're just looking for someone to follow out of the darkness into the light, as it were, and it's easier for them. So I don't know if you intended that, but that metabolic angle is key for me. So
John's worked on that, and he's what he does a module on that on his course. It's the last week, and the work he's done on it already, and the paper he's written that I've looked at and tried to help a bit. I brought it into a bit of my understanding, and it's helped me a lot understand myself as a coach and as a psychologist, because there are players that I work with that can't keep up with me, and there are times as well that even the ones that can keep up can't handle me and what I do, because it's like quite, it's quite pacey and quite overwhelming. And there's a lot. I put a lot of responsibility onto people. I think that's more the existential type stuff that you have to ultimately try and take a bit of a responsibility on, and that's what they get from me. They ultimately, whatever we try and do, they always go away with something that they've got to do, or sometimes say relax, but essentially, when the early days working and I'm trying to build them up and get along with them and get the career going or balanced out, or issues in their life fixed and balanced, there's always things that they've got to take on. And I've realised that I'm not everybody's cup of tea, because perhaps I am too much sometimes. So I've piped down a little bit. I've not gone pandering or inauthentic. I can only be me, but just monitor it a bit. But I've also not then blame the player for not being able to come with me. I've just thought they need a simpler way for whatever reason. They need someone who's not as, and that could be bioenergetic stuff. Personally as well, I've also valued my time with players about a lot more, because when I do an hour like this and I'm proper engaged and proper invested and listening, I'm starting to now understand how much energy that's taking from me. You know what I mean? I'm shattered because I'm so invested and I've been thinking and going in. So that has equally helped me go, well, I've changed my diet a bit as well with some of the things that help that, and habits. But it's really helped me as a practicing coach and psychologist to value my own time and not get burnt out myself, because, that's where he's helped me with that.
Just to bring that back to the critical thinking element as well, Dan, I would suggest that the time where we're most critical in our thinking at any point in our life is when we're kids. If you had 4, 5, 6-year-old kids where you've got energy to burn, you're never more inquisitive. You never ask more questions. The whole world is just a playground of learning new stuff and discovering new things and kind of just getting your hand, and it's all about what can I learn today? What's this? What's that? And then what kids are, and then they conk out and they need a kit for 2 hours because they've burnt so much cognitive energy up just being in the world and wanting to learn and see new stuff. And I think we lose that as we get older and older and older. So again, you get to that point where you see it in people where they just don't want to know. It's I just haven't got the energy to even begin to think about this. So just leave me alone and just tell me what I want to hear.
So let me pose a question on these people. If we pretty much broadly accept that human functioning is on a biopsychosocial level, or levels, and the complex interaction between biology, psychology, and our environment, our social environment. And if we accept that critical thinking, asking why, may well be or is metabolically expensive, and maybe really metabolically expensive for some people, and therefore we accept that some people are going to create schemas and mental models as simple as they possibly can, because that helps them function in their world better and possibly helps them function in this world of coaching that's most meaningful to them. Can we therefore, number one, blame them for engaging in this simple way? Because if we accept that there are individual differences, that maybe we can't blame people for not thinking critically. And secondly, and tied to that, is we therefore have to accept that some people are just going to be more one-dimensional than others, that they're just not capable. That's the thing. They're just not capable of engaging in critical thinking? Or am I thinking overly pessimistic about people's capabilities here?
I think that's definitely I don't think it's an unfair comment. I mean, you mentioned biopsychosocial. That's one of the points I'm trying to make in that paper, which I'm probably going to get pelted for when some people read it. But and my research, over the last few years has predominantly been in that social area. But kind of the point I was making was, look, I think we've missed the bio angle of this from a coach learning point of view. We're obsessed with the social stuff, and we're really good at that now as researchers. There's thousands of papers pretty much out there on that stuff now. There's loads on the psychology of it and getting into that side of things, but there's not a lot out there on that biological aspect of how that influences how we learn. Because at the end of the day, it's we're bodies that need energy. That's how we function. If you don't have energy, you're dead, essentially. You're just a pile of matter.
If you're in a permanent angle.
Yeah. So I've no doubt that there's people who, are severely hypometabolic, and I think you're probably right, Dan, that it doesn't matter what, them listening to this. Well, they're probably not even listening to this because it's, why would you want to listen to those three idiots just chatting about this? I can be sat on Netflix just mindlessly, consuming stuff that doesn't require much work, perhaps. So I think you're going to get people that are maybe untouchable that way. But I think it's a good point to bring it back to the biopsychosocial. It's the individual differences in that are just endless, aren't they? If every single person will have totally different levels, shall we say, of each one. And then even if you just brought one of them down, you're probably into thousands and thousands of different variables that are going to influence how well you go about thinking.
I think when you've had a good night's sleep and your diet, I've been saying this to players, sometimes you can say, oh, is it this mindset problem? Is it this? And sometimes it's like just literally sleeping, eating right, feeling good. What other things are costing you energy? Like I'm worrying about my brother, I'm worrying about my relationship, worrying about a debt I've got to pay. So you're working with a lot of people on sorting out all those micro little things in their life. And actually that stores up some of the energy that they've then got from a complex coach or their own ability to think their way through problems in the sport.
But diet is a great example of, I know it's taking us away from our particular interests and areas, but diet wars. If we think that some of the debates in coaching are bad, with ECOD and different kind of binary approaches or real like kicking off on social media, you want to see what like diet Twitter's like, and the amount of different tribal camps in there just having like brutal, just constant brutal arguments and debates. But it's not a debate like we're saying where it's positive and it's trying to make, it's just, this is the right answer, you're wrong and you're an idiot, and vice versa. And they're just going at it constantly. But I think that element that Dan is saying, it's, for example, say diet, you might have someone they've maybe kind of drunk the Kool-Aid, as it were, for a particular approach. So, I mean, again, it's going off script, but people, for example, like zero carb carnivore diets are getting quite mainstream and popular. And this month in the year is usually the worst. Everyone's on a diet because it's post-Christmas. It's like, right, new year, new me. And they're on it. So if you're already kind of susceptible and you're not really aware of how you've been influenced and how these little nudges are guiding what you think and value and believe, and then you go, right, now I'm going to go on a zero carb diet because some guru on Twitter with an 8-pack has told me that's the best way to live. Good luck trying to get an energy to your brain. It's like a massive glucose consumer just to actually get base level functioning, let alone higher level cognition. See, you can be someone who's thinking, I'm doing the right thing, I've thought about it, I'm not having your standard diet, I'm on a carnivore diet because I've looked into it and I want to do what the best way is. But you're actually getting further from the truth because of that lack of critical thinking at the start, which then compounds again because then you've even got less energy saying, and it all goes from there. So it's very complex again, but it's not just as simple as even just saying, well, eat a good diet, is it? Because there's a million and one ways that you could go about that, and they will all have different influences on cognition and higher order thinking and that type of stuff.
One bit to add for me, just our last bit really, biopsychosocial. I like to bring the philosophy part in, which was a lot of the study I did, and Simone de Beauvoir was interesting in talking about that once we leave childhood, we crave to go back there because life was so simple. You just get up, you just be a kid. That was your job. What's for tea? What we're doing tomorrow? When's the summer holidays? And blah blah blah. Up to the age of about 12, perhaps, and depending on obviously your childhood, but generally. And as you go older, there are certain roles you start to fall into and traps that are ambiguous. But one of them was the serious man. She called it that people get so serious and stuck in what they do that they lose that ability to have a sense of humour. And it's like, I am a conservative, I am a sports psychologist, I am a coach, and I am an academic, I am a vegan. And they basically, there were next layers, that she caricatured on that, debatable, but one of them was the passionate person that was similar to the serious man, but did it a little bit more with play and joy, but still stuck in it. And she, ultimately it was like, yeah, all these roles come up because you're trying to deny the ambiguity all the time of existence, of some days you're tired, some days you're not, some days you win, some days you don't, some days are good, some days are bad. You're worrying about the future, you're not worrying about the future. My life's great, my life's boring. All this ambiguity is constantly going on, and rather than just going, yeah, and almost trying to, what Nietzsche said as well in his metamorphosis stuff, of return to the child spirit, you get stuck in this serious mode. And I think John's alluded, that I think people go to these answers which are in a way a philosophical seriousness of, I am now into this particular movement, this is my cause, and that must, although we say that might be simple, it's actually very mentally taxing because you're not the kid and you're not getting the wonderment of life. That was one of my conclusions on how one might live well through a sporting life. One might live well if you can retain some of the wonderment and magic of life and living and mystery of it and sport. And you can enjoy like you did as a child. And I think that that was just something I wanted to add there, that this serious person caricature that I see from where I stand, a lot of people getting trapped in. And then we've talked about that all night, John. You've said that, haven't you, about nailing yourself so far?
Well, we're definitely. Me and Danny and I were laughing the other day because we're often chatting on WhatsApp, and we've kind of, like the past few years, we've kind of been on a similar journey, haven't Danny, with a lot of this stuff where we're just getting onto all this mad stuff. And I think we're both at a point where we really see the humour and the kind of absurdity in a lot of what is quite serious stuff. We're able to laugh at it. And I was saying I actually downloaded it because I was like, this is like a thesis in itself, just our WhatsApp chat history. And it was like 380 pages. And I'm sure if anyone looking at it would just be like, these boys are absolutely insane. Like, what are they talking about? Some of the stuff that it might be some, Danny sends me something that de Beauvoir said on some random thing, and then it'll just kick off like a thread of stuff. But I think both of us genuinely enjoy that. We're not looking for answers as in, like, we just want to know what is it? What should we be doing? How should we live? Like, we're just almost enjoying now the absurdity in just trying to get a little bit closer to it, but realising we're never going to get there. And the critical thinking stuff's a little bit like that. Yeah, seek truth, and you should always seek truth, but you should also accept you're probably never ever going to find it. But you better just been a little bit closer to it than the alternative.
Dan, do you find, so because I do that, like with John and so on, I personally keep my excitement and my bounce as a coach. And a lot of my players will say, "Oh, they'll almost like the way I am more than what I tell them." Do you find that in your craft as well, because you're successful in your relationships and stuff? Is it more the way you kind of consistently are for them, that they can, rather than obviously coming in with all this content and what you're into, but you know what I mean? Do you find that?
I do. I mean, I think I love what I'm hearing, and I love what you're saying, and I love that notion of wonderment, and I love de Beauvoir riffing on an early form of identity theory. And what I'll firstly say to you, Dan, is I feel that so much of my work is doing exactly what you're saying in terms of, I would, as a psychologist, describe as a narrative, a daily narrative, and helping players who are often at the elite end of the game with their sport turn down the volume of seriousness in order to turn up, yes, the volume of engagement,
Right.
enjoyment engagement, but actually having the knock-on desired effect of learning more effectively and subsequently performing optimally. But there's that interesting notion of actually not looking directly at optimal performance, but just doing that through the engagement piece. So I think so much of what you're talking about really resonates with me. It resonates with me from a golf career. If I had enjoyed it and had a bounce in my step, and it's a technique I have called a game face that feels a little bit more boxed in maybe for your liking, but a game face is very much about creating an ideal persona in the moment, and that ideal persona might change according to the demands of whether it's the task of what's going around you. And often I find it's go have fun in your game face, go express yourself in your game face, go love every single second in your game face. Now, you might not go and perform that well, but that's okay. That's all right. Next week, tomorrow, next day, so there's much more. So everything you're saying really resonates with me. I think as a practitioner, as a coach, as a psychologist, there's one slight caveat I'd say in my experience is that, for instance, I would certainly not be naming names or establishments or whatever here, but I've been involved where there's been somebody who hasn't been a psychologist but done the kind of stuff that I've done, and has been very flamboyant and very out there, and this big personality, far more extroverted than say I am. And I think everybody loved that at first, but over time, the popularity of that kind of wilted as the realization dawned that this person perhaps didn't have the domain-specific knowledge that's required. And so it almost comes back to keeping that element of critical thinking, and to have that critical thinking, coming back to what you said at the beginning, John, which again we haven't really explored, is you've still got to have the domain-specific knowledge, I suppose, to think critically, because if we don't have that, we can't shift. And so I don't know if I've answered your question. So yes, but we still have to have some domain knowledge.
Yeah. Well, there's a consistency, however, in your personality, in your relationship, with the player. You're not throwing random, you're either consistently kind of calm and or whatever, or consistently outgoing. But if it's not built on anything substantial, then it's useless anyway, isn't it? That you just random.
It's got to be on a firm ground.
And I think you're back there, Dan, as well, to where I said, so if you don't have the domain-specific knowledge or a body of knowledge, for me, it's not the classic logic, calculus, critical thinking. It's more the attitude of recognising, I know what I don't know. And then once you've got that, it's like, right, now I need to know what I need to go and find out about, and I can start from there. But that's more of like an attitudinal disposition than I'm unable to think critically. You've got to want to kind of know more and be curious and find out more to take that first step.
And that is going to lead us into a neat segue into finishing off here with, because I'm conscious of both your times. I could talk to you for another few hours, but in terms of people having an opportunity to engage in these kind of conversations, having an opportunity perhaps to improve their capacity, their ability to critically think. John, you've got a course that you're unleashing on the world in 2022, and I know Danny is a part of that course. Why don't you just, for the last few minutes, take us through that course? Why don't you take us through what that looks like and how people can potentially sign up?
Yeah, so as people who know me will know, marketing is my thing. So, I'm probably not going to do the best job of selling this, but essentially it originated from when we started, when you asked us to introduce ourselves, and I was saying I was kind of in like a bit of, not an identity crisis, but just feel like I don't really have an identity because I'm not an academic, because I'm not attached to an institution, and I don't have that job title of, whatever, where it's kind of on your bio and that's you. But that was kind of what led me to this, because I was, 11, 12 years in HE, and it was, thinking about authenticity and stuff like that. More and more, I was just finding myself kind of thinking, what I'm doing here is just getting further and further away from my personal values and beliefs as an educator, if anything. So how I think education should be done, and what it's about, and some of the kind of philosophy behind that. And it was pretty much just a case of, look, you get to a point where it's just you've got to walk your talk. So for me, it just felt like the right time. Look, I need to step away from that more formal HE environment. Which I've done, obviously, and then I still had the bug. So what I've come at, we're calling it Think Space, and it really is just an online course. Is like a formal term. It's more like a place where people who are just a bit curious, a bit inquisitive, kind of fancy just getting into some deeper stuff than they've maybe done so far. So it's not hardcore philosophy. It's not hardcore kind of real high level academic stuff. But it's more that fun aspect of, right, let's just get amongst some different things that, I think are playing a really big role in how you perceive the world and how you go about your life. And let's just have some fun with it and get into that positive argumentation that I was saying earlier. So there's 8 workshops on there, going through a range of different things, all essentially related in one way or another back to critical thinking. So it starts off at that base level of, right, ontology. How do we view the world? What is going on when we actually think we're interacting with the world? And how do we go about knowing that? So that's that kind of real base level if we start from there. And we just go through the 8 workshops, and then in between there's like a private members online community of practice, essentially, that originates from a lot of the research that I've done with coaches over the years, where that's where we really get into that, taking it to the critical level. So it's not just like, let's have a 2-hour workshop and I just speak at people for 2 hours and give them a load of stuff. There's a bit of teaching, but it's a lot more discursive and two-way. So it's me presenting some ideas and then people just getting into that discussion. What do we think? How does this apply to you? Done in that fun way. And then the in-between bits are where we just try and deepen that through more kind of asynchronous discussion. So rather than it being live and in the room or in the online room, essentially, it's more just that you've got that space to maybe collect your thoughts, think about something a bit more deeply, apply it to your own experiences, maybe read a couple of things and then reply. So we're just trying to deepen that discussion, essentially, and take it to that more critical, reflective level. And that's it. A lot of it emanates from the work that Danny and I have been doing for a few years now on an MSc course at UCLan. And that was where the seeds of it came from, that attitude to how we go about teaching and the attitude we have towards it. And just I've tried to say it's a bit of a throwback to the old school Platonic ideal, really, of what education was about back in the day. It wasn't just throw a load of content at people and just give them the knowledge or try and give them the knowledge. It was a lot more about them doing the learning themselves and us just helping that along and nudging them, prodding them, making them feel uncomfortable at certain points, and just try to go with that attitude of, look, we're all here to learn and just get better and get a bit more switched on to what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Sounds awesome. How can people sign up?
The website is thinkspace, all one word, .academy. So thinkspace.academy. If they go there, they'll get all the information that they need. The first cohort, we're only running 2 cohorts a year, so this is not a massive, operation. It's real quality versus quantity. 2 cohorts a year. First one's April, May this year, so people can go on there at the minute and reserve a place. And then we're going to open enrolment like the month before. And it'll be, it's one of those where, like I say, I'm not a marketer, but I can kind of guarantee if you come on and you've got that open mind and attitude, you'll enjoy it. You'll get a lot from it.
Well, I like your critical thinking around your marketing capacity. So
it's that authenticity, though.
It's that authenticity.
I'm so kind of conscious of that. People see you, they try to sell you stuff. It's not me. So yeah.
Listen, guys, thank you so much for your time. It's been really, really fascinating. I think there's absolutely areas that we can talk about further, and I think perhaps if we get you both on, if you agree to come on at the end of the year and even discuss some of your experiences from the course and dig a little bit deeper into some of the stuff you've been doing, Danny, with your PhD and also further on the critical thinking. So that'd be great. So I think last thing to ask you both before we close is, I know you will have tapped the interest of the Sports Psych Show audience, so they can absolutely go on your ThinkSpace website, John, but how can they follow you on social media and get in contact with you if you'd like them to?
Primarily just through Twitter. That's where I'm most active in terms of social media. So just John Stoszkowski, all one word. I don't want to speak for Danny, but you won't mention, but I do recommend people, they'll be able to get hold of his PhD thesis at some point in the next, it'll get uploaded so they can read that for free. Yeah. I would recommend a lot of your listeners, I think, could get a lot of insights from that. It's probably something very different. I'm sure Danny will agree that they're probably used to reading, but I think there's a lot of value in it for not just sports psychologists, coaches, athletes, everyone. So I definitely recommend they try and, I'll let Danny sell it, where they can get it, but go and have a read of that.
And Danny, how can people download that thesis, and also how can they follow you? Or are you on any form of social media?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Danny Maz1, so I'm not massive into it really. They might get more of my DJ mixes than they get my opinions on sport. But no, or dmassaro1 at uclan.ac.uk if they want to email. But my thesis, I'm just packaging it in a way. The first bit was all these Socratic style dialogues, one with Nietzsche, one with de Beauvoir, one with Camus, one with Sartre, and one with Heidegger. So they're like in itself, that's like a nice little sort of thing to play with. So I'll be getting those out, and then some of the other things I've done, like the anecdotes and some of my autophenomenography and things, bits of poetry and stuff I've written from when I was live on tour and some of the things we went through. So they'll be coming out, but there we go.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for today. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dan.
No problem. Got it, Dan.
Well, everybody, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. Please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.